back in 1981, I remember finally graduating from high school when suddenly the TV and the radio stations were filled with breaking news about a national health crisis that was developing and targeting gay men. A powerful gay plague was rising in America in the likes that the medical field has never seen before, and it was combated with toxic medications that were ineffectively harsh to one's body chemistry. This paradigm forced a spectrum of fears and anxieties to be rushed onto those who were initially infected with the mysterious disease, and all gay men found themselves targeted with an unprecedented level of mean-spirited hostility that came from all sides. President Reagan's response at the time was halting and insipid, which mostly came from the newly identified religious right and the morality of the moral majority of political action group founded by Reverend Jerry Falwell, which became the tool of the politics of fear, hate, and discrimination that argued that HIV and AIDS is nature's revenge on gay men. Flash forward to 1988, when the first World AIDS Day was observed. It was a year since I was first diagnosed with HIV. I remember the night that I found out, I was in my apartment building. I had a housewarming party, and after everybody left, it were just me and two other men, and we had a nice time together. And when the men left and I went to bed, 2:30 in the morning, my apartment building went up in flames, and I was trapped. I was trapped in the fire, and I passed out from smoke inhalation. The firemen broke through the door to get me out, and they rushed me to the emergency room where I was in a burn unit, and they had to test my blood, and they found that I was HIV positive. So I just wanted my life to end right there on that table, and after that, the tragedy and the trauma of my life sent me into a downward spiral of drug addiction and loneliness, isolation. And so I was able to survive in the darkness by myself and to find love in the dark for many, many years. So World AIDS Day became kind of like a second birthday for me. World AIDS Day is a reminder of more than 3 decades of an epidemic, where more than 70 million people around the world have been infected with HIV. 35 million people have died from HIV and AIDS-related causes, while much progress has been made to prevent HIV and treating HIV. Today, 36 million people are currently living with the virus. So I remember really hating myself for the people that I infected, feeling that shame of not disclosing my full diagnosis. And every time I tried to overtake the drugs and take enough drugs to kill myself, I could never die. I never died, and I just kept asking, why, God? Why am I still here? There must be a reason for me to still be here after all the suicide attempts, all the times that I lived reckless and endangered other people's lives. And so I looked up and it was 2005 and I was still here. And I started finding my way into recovery from drug addiction. And I remember going to this agency called Asian Human Services that helped people in my neighborhood to recover from drug addiction with art therapy. And I remember doing art and also learning how to do poetry, and so I brought the first poem that I wrote, which is called Sometimes. Sometimes I worry a lot. Why am I still living with all the illnesses that I've got? I've outlived many friends and also a lover. Each time it happens, I feel I won't recover. Sometimes I worry a lot about all the things that I'm not. A glance or a stare from someone who's hot. It makes me feel good, but go further, it will not. Solitude is my closest friend, giving me inner peace as I watch the world end. But it never does. I find new things to cherish, even though I know that someday I will perish. Working hard to pay bills used to leave me pissed. but I found that the meaning of life is just to exist. Immortal I know that I am not. Maybe that's why sometimes I worry a lot. 2 years later, I found myself invited to MCC in Chicago, where I became part of the lay leadership team, and I worked hospitality. I became a minister of hospitality, and I got to socialize. And each week that I took communion, I found that I was ingesting Jesus in me and letting the word resonate in my heart, which made me feel wholer and complete, fill up that emptiness that I was feeling inside. I found a purpose in life again. And now, after 10 years of membership with MCC, this welcoming 48-year-old open and affirming ministry is not perfect, but it's a lot further along than many other church communities, in my opinion, within the Christian faith, when it comes to the inclusion and fair treatment of women. Many older congregants tell me stories of the struggles of the back in the day when MCC churches were first beginning. Since the founder, Reverend Roy Troy Perry, was a man, new churches were taking form all over the country and subversively using a heteronormative approach to a church structure, meaning that the men were always in charge and held most of the titles and roles, while the women were mostly doing the behind-the-scenes work of keeping the church together as laity and congregants. But behind the scenes, and during the rise of HIV and AIDS in the 80s, many of the MCC's church leaders, male church leaders, had fallen sick from the disease, charging the women to step up and take on many of the leadership roles. The women cared and nurtured for both the churches and their stricken leaders. They took over the leadership roles that were abandoned. For years, the women helped MCC through a very difficult time, until new medicines were created that helped stabilize the decline of the men. Many of those women went on to pursue clergy degrees and became pastors. In fact, MCC's moderator, in succession to the founder, is a lesbian woman who has been overseeing the growing ministry since 2005, and that's the Reverend Elder Dr. Nancy Wilson. Nancy is now about to retire, and I'm proud that the current interim moderator is a friend of mine who used to be my pastor back at MCC Chicago, Reverend Elder Rochelle Brown. And this is one trend that I pray continues to bless others and to show that no battle of the sexes is necessary when it comes to doing God's work. So in closing, I would just like to say that I feel that I'm leaning towards into being more of an activist, and actually I want to become like a role model and an activist and an icon in the Boston community for HIV and AIDS. That's why I dress like this, and I was at the State House the other day rallying for funding for HIV because our Governor Baker has cut the funding. And so that's why I've been talking in recent weeks about the closure of services in Jamaica Plain. And so I want to help combat that, especially after I graduate from seminary in May. And so I feel I have more time to do that. And I want to be able to step up and take control of the ministry that Jim Campbell had. I know he was a beloved member of this community, and he used to rally for all the HIV and AIDS activity and funding that needed to be done. So I want to be able to step up into that role. And so I would like to close this time and observance for all the people that we miss and love in our lives with a time of prayer.